change coming at a research institutions to apprise you of that. Other questions about core course requirements? No.
Can I just ask why mine is 21 versus 18?
They actually asked for that. It was even a little higher, and then as the board kind of looked holistically at, the four-year regional, the masters, and the doctoral or research institutions, mine actually was higher than 21, and we kind of negotiated that just so that it made sense kind of the consumer, that these were sort of staggered by levels. So mine had actually had a slightly higher one. Because at the end of the day, what they're asked, what the public cares about is retention and graduation rates. So it's in their best interest also to be thinking about the students they admit on the front end. So that's why the board and the institutions look at those. But it's nice still to have that holistic approach. We all know students, those scores may not be reflective exactly of them per se, but we need to have published standards. Oh. All right. So the other category is our research institutions, and that is their designation formally are research institutions. North Dakota State University in Fargo and University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. They too have core course requirements for admission, and I'll talk about a little bit more. Their GPA is a 2.75 and a composite of a 22. So see how it's sort of that staggered. If you saw them all in a single grid, it was slightly higher than mine at State's ACT. So on the high school core course requirements, this is a relatively recent development. So the board, remember I told you board policy is kind of overarching guidance. The board basically said they'd like to see the research institutions require 14 core courses for students who are entering in fall 2017 and they asked that it go to 15 core courses for students entering fall of 2018. But the board stopped short of stipulating or specifying what core courses and what categories they need to be in. So remember I mentioned earlier the English, math, social science. They actually let that be at the purview of the institutions or the system to kind of work on that. So a policy was developed in working with UND and NDSU about what would be appropriate core courses. And, they came back with the recommendation that additional core courses could be in any of the existing categories, or, I wrote this down because it was pretty specific, including any of the world languages, foreign languages, Native American languages, or American Sign Language was the other categories that they included. And I should point out something that I discovered, I suppose now it's been a couple of years, but on the DPI website, the resource that you put together, the MISO3 codes, and it's a beautiful matrix of all. Amy, I bet you were involved in probably developing that with some of the DPI stuff. It's so helpful, and I've now put it out for admissions people to link to that. Sometimes even when K-12 folks call me, I redirect them to that. But it basically tells them, lists all of the courses, and the final column on the right-hand side indicates whether it fulfills a high school core course requirement. Because before that was ever developed, I think admissions officers just kind of kept like a little notebook on their desk of what they thought filled core course requirements. And you can see you have evaluations that might have been inconsistent. So this document that we can all point to is so helpful. And yesterday, I happened to be just looking at an e-transcript, because I don't work with them directly, and that nicely also indicates which courses fulfill core course requirements. So that's very handy. Other questions about admission, just overarching admission requirements of the research institutions?
I just have a question. When you look at the different requirements for entering those, I actually have two questions. What percentage of people are denied entrance into, say, the research university?
I could get that. I don't have it in hand. Contrary to what the public believes, sometimes that they just want scoop up everybody they could have, the admissions people, and I know them best because I work with them monthly, they actually tell me, not every student is perfectly suited at the research institution. The courses are rigorous. They don't have the supports that the community colleges have in terms of tutoring and sort of the mentorship program. So sometimes contrary to public perception that just we would like everybody we could have, admissions folks are very careful and follow these standards, published standards carefully. Jen, I'm not sure if we know how many, go ahead.
Well, my son just toured UND, very impressed by the way. And he was looking at med school, and they told him about 22%. I don't know if that answers part of your question, but or accept it.
Into the medical school or
Medical school, yeah.
And then another question, in terms of graduating on time, where are the research universities as opposed to the regional?
Oh, yep. I do have that. I brought that with me. I'm feeling that might be a question. So we're really looking at graduation rates. I don't know, it's like winging numbers, because about that time you're quoted or getting it. Oh, sorry. So, you know, one thing is graduation. We think of students graduating in 4 years. More formally, the Department of Education graduation is 150%. So if you're in a 4-year program, on-time graduation would be within 6 years, or what they call 150% time frame. So that's the number that I'll cite, the number of students that graduate within that six-year time frame. So at NDSU, for example, I'm looking at retention, remediation, 150. So at UND, 55% of their students graduate within that 6-year period. And this is a cohort. And a cohort isn't just every student that enters the institution. A cohort is very formally described as first-time, full-time students. They form a cohort and track them through. So this cohort that they watch and they track, so it kind of excludes part-time students. And sadly, it also excludes transfers, who are sometimes more successful, they're often more motivated to wrap up. So this cohort that they track at UND, the graduation rate within the 6-year period is 55%, and at NDSU it's 53%. And before I move on, I don't think that's that far off from the national average, actually. And this makes sense, it's kind of logical. The more selective the institution is, the higher the graduation rate. So, you know, if you tooth and nail want, you know, to get into Harvard or Princeton, you're not going to give up that seat. So graduation and retention rates are higher.
We've been doing dual credit for a number of years. How has that, I mean, thinking back before dual credit, that's obviously plays into a factor of how many kids are getting done before 6 years. We got seniors that can go off to college with a semester or even 2 in some schools ahead of schedule.
And it's interesting that you're experiencing that in Northwest North Dakota, because the schools along the Minnesota border are structured differently than North Dakota in terms of dual credit. And it's not unusual for Minnesota students to actually enter colleges and universities with almost or an entire associate degree completed. Because across the border, not that far, they're completing those in a different environment. In North Dakota, the students are paying more for their credits. You know, the families do have to contribute. I do not have an exact number that increases graduation rates by X%, but we have our institutional researcher from our office here today. I think that's something that we could incorporate into our presentations, like to what extent is dual credit may be advancing to these activities. Yep.
How do the students that end up going into a 2-year college, what are the admission requirements for transfer to them if they do not meet this?
If they did not meet that. So that was a very good question. And I worked with transfer students probably the longest. And sort of the threshold for being a transfer student is having 24 transferable credits. So if you have 24 or more semester hours, if you think about that, that's about 2 terms. You know, so if you went to Bismarck State College for 2 terms and decided you were going to transfer to NDSU, you're now a transfer student, and we don't look at you like a new freshman anymore. You've given us 24 semester hours to look at and evaluate. You know, how did you do in those, especially at the college level? Now you've had a chance to demonstrate. How did you do in 24 college level credits? And so they are admitted as a transfer student, and they're required to at least have a 2.0 GPA. 2.0 GPA and 24 transferable credits. If you have less than that, it's sort of conceivable you haven't given us a lot to look at in terms of admission. So even though you might be a transfer and bringing credits in, they ask you to supply freshman-like data so they can look at how did you do in the high school if you had 12 credits or 9 credits. And honestly, some of those could have even been in a high school setting, right? As a dual credit experience. So that's kind of back to that holistic looking at it.
So does that mean that perhaps students that took dual enrollment would be looked at more like they were transfer students than high school students?
I think they still look at them as a freshman. They do, because here's the thing, everybody wants them in their cohort. You would not want to count them. Who wants this high school student who has 28 credits and dump them in as a transfer, and then you don't get to count them for any, you don't get to count them on your graduation or retention. Who would want to carve them out and say, those should be excluded? So, and this isn't just us making that decision. Nationally, students who have left the high school and are bringing dual credit with them are counted as first-time, full-time freshmen in a college setting. And they're great performers. Good, great questions. I should have incorporated this.
I want to piggyback on Mr. Archuleta's question just a little bit. Because I know that I've often asked several students to North Dakota State University or UND with a composite ACT score of less than 22. So when they are accepted without the ACT score that's required, are they immediately put into remediation? And the reason for my question is because that's one of the things that we take a lot of heat for as high school principals, is remediation required. When some of those students that are being accepted, I would make an argument, without attacking them of course, that they probably don't belong in a research institution. They probably belong in a different setting. And I would also argue the point that many of them aren't complete once they are admitted with less than a score. So what happens to a student who, say, has a 20 ACT composite, but is still admitted to NDSU?
So one of the things they do look at is sort of this two-pronged. They do look at GPA. In fact, some of the research they've done said actually GPA was the best predictor, and that's nationally, and they found that in their own state research. Which for a moment I was like, that's interesting. High school GPA is the best predictor of long-term success. But they do look at if a student has a 21, they are looking at what is their high school GPA and what kind of courses did they take and how did they do in that core. The research admissions folks that I work with honestly wish it was just looking at core high school GPA, because sometimes your GPAs can be kind of, I don't want to say diluted, but diluted with other extracurricular activities. And, right, like you might not do so well in core, but it's kind of diluted in these great grades and some courses that aren't being factored into the core. I think that's interesting coming from them, that they would like to look more firmly at the core GPA. Yes, I do know they get in and they're accountable for that. And here's how they're accountable. When stakeholders ask them, why did your graduation rate go from 55 to 53 to 52 to 50? The campuses are going to have to take a hard look at who are we again.
So are they placed immediately into remediation, or is that determined on a...
Right, so they are not dumped into, they are not just, automatically enrolled into a remedial course, but it is part of the advising.
Okay.
And I guess I can't elaborate more because some students might, if something was traumatic, they might put off, I'm not an advocate of this, but they might put off taking college algebra or thinking about math for a year.
Yeah.
Not the best idea in my book, but that is their strategy. With the students that I have the opportunity to talk to, I ask them, that is like a string of courses that you want to do one right after another. You don't want to lose that momentum. I don't get to advise all the girls.
Is the GPA the same for all students, grades 9, 10, 11, and 12, including the GPA?
You have 9 through 12. 9 through 12 is in the GPA. And actually, in terms of North Dakota, we use the one I think that's calculated, by a transcript. Schools, our admissions folks aren't necessarily always calculating those by hand. They're probably taking the GPA. You're probably talking about, there are weighted GPAs, I think, where students can get more than 4.0.
So,
Did I miss it? I feel like I didn't answer your question.
well, basically was, what grades of school
Oh,
are included?
9 through 12.
Yeah,
Yep.
pretty much.
Yep, 9 through 12.
Yeah, there can be different weights, but in the calculation, in the end, they only come with one number to
Great.
the college.
Yep.
But a B in some schools is not a B in another school, by percentage points.
I'm not going to argue with that.
That's just a group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We
We
don't
saw
care.
it, but that's what it was. We saw that even when I was on the school board in Manhattan, our grading scale was different than the Bismarck's. I mean, 90 to 100 was an A in one school district, and 94 to 100 was an A in another. So it's okay. And that's local control.
Thank you. So I talked about the board, that overarching guidance. If you pull up board policy, Rona Borean Compass, 402.1.2, it talks about student placement very specifically in college courses. It specifically mentions the use of the ACT step scores. It specifically mentions placement into English 110, college composition 1, and specifically mentions math 103, college algebra. Those are the only two that the board mentions specifically. And the what is to be used for placement. And then it's applicable for all of the North Dakota universities, colleges, and universities. We have further guidance in the North Dakota University system procedure that permits additional approved placement tools. So what we try to do initially, Amy can attest to this too, we were very careful to try and crosswalk. So if we look at another resource for placement, how did that sort of crosswalk to the ACT requirements that the board had stipulated? And so I will show you a slide that details the additional placement tools that the system came up with that the campuses could use. This is what I really want to emphasize that I think is important to this group. What we wanted to get away from was colleges and universities using homegrown placement tests. The high schools were calling us and saying it's very annoying that my student, has the ACT scores, SAT scores, maybe has a smarter balance score, whatever, but you've got colleges and universities saying, well, we have our own homegrown placement test. And if the student doesn't need math at that institution and transfers, they have to take that homegrown placement test. And nothing was portable or mobile with the student. And so the feedback that we got was, please use something nationally recognized and honored among all of your institutions. And so that's in essence what the purpose of the procedure was, to have common scores, so that it wasn't like a 22 was required of the research and a 20 was in the community colleges. We actually have a shared score. And if you're asking why, at the end of the day, they're placing into the same course with the same outcomes. Why would you ask the community college students to come any less prepared to the table? So that's why we have the same score. And so the purpose of, to a large extent, was to discontinue the use of institutionally developed exams. So here's kind of a summary. I kind of call these families of placement resources. So ACT, kind of a large one in our state utilized across the system, has a composite ACT administered your junior, senior year. They also have the Aspire, which is a test that we use largely for 10th grade for placement into dual credit courses. And the Compass, I'll talk about more, but is more like for an immediate assessment, just not a full day of testing type activity. College Board has its SAT, and then they have AccuPlacer. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then Smarter Balanced is sort of a relative newcomer in terms of an assessment that colleges and universities are using for consideration of placement. And to be clear, I've attended a number of Smarter Balanced meetings. So it's not just a term up there. I've gone to numerous meetings. We meet monthly on what are colleges and universities doing across the nation within Smarter Balanced high school assessment. There are some others that honestly, at this very moment, colleges and universities are looking at. PARC is sort of the other complement, I guess, probably to Smarter Balance. Pearson is an entire series of curriculum. I'll just group these together. Alex and Pearson are both have developmental curriculum that have placement tests kind of embedded in them. So we're looking at maybe successful completion of these activities could place you in their college algebra. And then also the North Dakota Center for Distance Education has some placement resources available for students. this is even in greater detail. Last night I actually grouped them by color, so I don't have to like wave wildly like this. So in terms of English, remember I said English was the first class that that's specified by board policy. I grouped them like this. The yellow is something that would most likely be administered maybe in grade 10. The gray, this gray grouping right here, are rather formal assessments. They're not just randomly sitting out there for someone to just administer on any given day. If you've administered the ACT, it's on a certain day, half the day, very formal. And that's what the grade grouping is. But colleges and universities needed some way for students to demonstrate additional acquired learning, whether it be grade 12, over the summer, an online course, a TED Talk, a series of lectures. So colleges and universities use AccuPlacer and Compass to place students more immediately. And the bad news is, for some unknown reason, ACT is discontinuing the Compass. So that's left colleges and universities and high school students in the lurch. So we're scrambling to find a replacement for those. And Pearson, again, Pearson is more of that, an entire curriculum, not just a one-time test. And then moving ahead, similarly, math doesn't be aspired replacement. The grouping of the gray ones that are more formal assessments. The blue are the kind of immediate student drops in, I want to demonstrate something, and enroll tomorrow. So that's available to colleges and universities. Let's see the minimum score. The reason these three right here do not have the exact examination scores because the math folks are still making those recommendations. Okay? So higher ed is particularly interested in the grade 11, or, and I'm not sure where this is going to shake out, if it might be a grade 12, possibly a grade 12 assessment for the purpose of advising. And so tell me if you've talked about this already today, the scores, the Smarter Balance scores. So as our understanding, the students would receive a score of 1 through 4, and clearly we know that 1 and 2 were below grade level proficiency. The language I'm hearing is 3, and correct me if I'm wrong, my Smarter Balance counterparts as well. 3 would be proficient at grade level, and 4 would be deemed above grade level proficiency. And they asked how we might use that for placement. So we developed a policy. This is in draft and about to be approved. Is for whether English language arts or mathematics, a Smarter Balance score of 3. And at the time, it was my understanding it could possibly be conducted in grade 11, but it could be 12. That would be permissible for enrollment in college level degree credit, those 2 courses I mentioned before, if the student provided proof of successful completion of a subsequent high school course or other recommended preparatory course. And again, this language was sort of contingent on if this were administered in grade 11. You can see the problem if this is, and I shouldn't say a problem, but if administered in grade 12, you don't necessarily have another subsequent year to enroll in a course. So the language will probably be vague enough to say, or other recommended preparatory course. They can go out and take something like online or Pearson, work with the high school over the summer, but we want to have numerous avenues for the students to sort of beef up any shortcomings. And this could be done in the high school. Oh, go ahead.
Just a question. It happens to be that our math meeting just got the math department just got the Smarter Balance results. It was nothing but individual students that we know of so far. But there were no 1, 2, 3, 4 scores. There were other scores to that. And so perhaps somebody could enlighten me as to how those scores relate to 1, 2, 3, 4.
What were your scores? What did you see?
235, that kind of, those kind of numbers, 340, that sort of thing.
So I do know Smarter Balance also had cut scores. So when at first your reaction might have been mine. When I saw 1 through 4, I was like, that is not a whole lot to work with. When you're used to ACT scores in this range, So at first I was kind of taken back at the 1 through 4. But my understanding of Smarter Balance is that the 1 through 4 is to help communicate to the student. Behind the scenes, there are thresholds like in the thousands. I thought like 1,300 might be and South Dakota actually published theirs within the full range, but that's confusing for students.
And I apologize. It was ACT schools, not Smarter Balance.
Oh.
So my apologies about that. We don't know what Smarter Balance is yet.
So these scores that I showed you are kind of like the public-facing scores. This is what the student gets, and I'm looking to Greg to make sure if I'm off task at all. The student this is what the student gets, and the communications with the families are queuing off this 1 through 4. But we know that behind the scenes, there are additional metrics that are placing students. And it's my understanding that we may even have access to those eventually if we want to do more finite placing into remedial courses. But for now, are we comfortable placing off the 1 through 4? Yes.
Just a quick question. You said they asked us to develop a policies and state assessment. Is they the Board of Higher Education?
Actually, it came from numerous fronts. So, Smarter Balanced is a resource available to colleges and universities, and so they encourage you to develop policies.
Smarter Balance.
Yes, it started with Smarter Balance, but in working with K-12, so that would additionally help. For the reason that students need to have a reason, there's, why am I taking this test? And so there's some teeth in it. And I see no reason why we couldn't use it for placement purposes, right?
Yeah. The origin of that goes all the way back to 2010, when Smarter Balance was being developed and the states were forming into a consortium. That the university presidents of all the participating states signed on with the intent to develop an assessment that would serve the purposes for placement. And so following the activity of actually creating those assessments, then it allows for the formal review of each of the states. Did in fact the effort achieve what the original desire was, to have a placement-based tool for the purposes that were originally set forth? So when Smarter Balance moved forward with it, it was in a sense completing the cycle of the agreement that the states would have provided to them a means of providing a placement tool for the purposes of college.
So all our university presidents signed on and said, yes, we will.
They signed on to the 2010 agreement to move forward with it with the intent, but that the Smart Balance had to then complete that effort. And so what is being proposed right now by review of the board is to say, considering the effort, has it reached that level where it could be received and used as a placement test? And Lisa, am I being correct on that?
I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention North Dakota higher ed faculty were